Okay, so in the previous class, we have actually looked at a few yogas concerning Kala Sarpa. Okay, so today we'll be looking at more yogas. Okay, so we just to refresh what we did in the last class, we looked at the Nabhasa Sankhya yogas. Okay, and what are those? What were those yogas? Number one was Vina Yoga. We looked at Dhamma Yoga. We looked at Pasha Yoga. We looked at Kedar Yoga. We looked at Shula Yoga. We looked at Yuga Yoga. We looked at Gola Yoga. Okay, so we'll continue our discussion from there. And before we begin the class, as always, we start with the Shanti Mantra. Okay. Om Sahana Bhavato Sahana Bhunakato Sah Viryankar Vavahai तेजस्विनादधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay, let's begin. So the next type of yoga we'll be looking at is Pravrajya Yoga. Okay, so what is Pravrajya? If more than 3 planets are there in a single house, okay, or at least 4 planets of the visible planets, excluding Rahu and Ketu, if they are within a single house, then they, it is called Pravrajya Yoga. Okay, and this is a difficult yoga to overcome. Okay, because the weight of the 4 planets on the houses, it causes a lot of pressure. Okay, and if this is happening in the kendras, then it's a very difficult yoga to overcome because it can break one of the kendras. Okay, it can break the kendras. So the nodes do not count in Pravrajya Yoga, but they of course can join in. Okay, but they are not counted as the qualifying planets creating a Pravrajya Yoga. For example, if we consider the chart of Lee Harvey Oswald, okay, so he has Sun, Mercury, Rahu, and Venus in Libra. Okay, so it is not Pravrajya Yoga because node is actually qualifying as one of the 4 planets. Okay. Similarly, if you look at the chart of Marie Curie or Charles Bukowski, okay, or Nikola Tesla, then we can see there are these charts, they have at least 4 or even more planets in a single sign. Okay, so this is a clear of this is a this is a case of Pravrajya Yoga. Okay, so what Pravrajya Yoga does is, apart from exerting a lot of pressure on one of the houses, it actually suggests a singular focus in one particular domain of life. And some astrologers, they also call it as a sannyasa yoga. Okay, because traditionally this yoga is associated with spiritual endeavors. Okay, and how does it help? It bestows powers of good concentration. Okay, whoever has Pravrajya Yoga, such a native would naturally have a great concentration power. Okay, but then this is not to be mistaken that everyone with Pravrajya Yoga will be a yogi. That is not the case. Okay, it is not that if you have a Pravrajya Yoga, you can become a yogi. All right, to become a yogi, it requires a special combination of planets. Okay, I'm not going to discuss about those combinations basically, but even if you want to become a sannyas, if you want to take sannyas, Ketu, Venus, and Saturn has to play a very prominent role in the chart. Okay, now what I've seen as per my calculations is that for an average chart without Kala Sarpa, the chances of having a Pravrajya Yoga is around 5 to 6%. Okay, but if we consider charts with Kala Sarpa Yoga, then the chances, they jump up to around 20%. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is, charts having Kala Sarpa Yoga, they are more prone, or they are more likely to have Pravrajya Yoga. Okay, and aside from this yoga, all right, the potential consequence of 4 planets together is that they may in turn form multiple other yogas. Okay, depending on the ascendant and the houses ruled by those planets. Okay, So as I said, as we studied in the previous class, Kala Sarpa increases the frequency of combustion. It reduces the frequency of retrogression. And as we do a comparative study of Pravarajya, what it means is Kala Sarpa triples the chances of Pravarajya Yoga. Okay. And what happens because of that is, as a consequence of having 4 planets or more than 4 planets in one sign, the chances of Graha Yuddha also increases. Okay, the chances of Graha Yuddha also increases. All right. So what is Graha Yuddha? Graha Yuddha is a planetary condition when two, true planets, that means excluding Rahu or Ketu, they join within 1 degree of longitude. Okay, just to make things clear, Sun and Moon, they do not participate in Graha Yuddha. Okay, only the other 5 planets, that means Saturn, Venus, Jupiter, Mars, and Mercury, they will only participate in Graha Yuddha. Okay, and if the planets are separated by more than 1 degree, okay, in fact, if it is, if the separation is says 1 degree 1 minute, then it is not planetary war. Okay, it is not Graha Yuddha, right? So just like we did it for the other yogas, for the other conditions like combustion or retrogression, or just as we did today for Pravarajya, we can also calculate the chances for Graha Yuddha, in the average chart without Kala Sarpa, and also in the chart with Kala Sarpa Yoga. Okay, so we first consider the outer planets, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. They actually enjoy complete freedom of movement relative to the sun. Okay, and what happens is the inferior planets, okay, if they happen to go into a Pravarajya Yoga, one planet will engage in planetary war with another planet within 1 degree of approaching exactitude. Okay, within 1 degree of separation. All right, and the possibility is very, very less. It is less than 1%. Okay, it is 1%. But what happens is with the inner planets like Mercury and Venus, the chances of planetary war are high. Okay, why? Because from the Earth's perspective, we always study jyotish from the Earth's perspective. Yes, so from the Earth's perspective, Mercury is always 28 degrees of the sun, while Venus is never more than 48 degrees from the sun. Okay, so even if Mercury, let's say if Mercury was far east of the sun as it could get, and Venus was far west as it could get, so these two will never be more than 76 degrees apart. Okay, so if we ignore retrogression, okay, if we ignore retrogression, then Mercury and Venus will form Graha Yuddha within a 2 degree arc of their entire 76 degree range. Okay, and once we impose the limits of Kala Sarpa, the chances of outer planets forming planetary war, they are doubled. Okay, they are doubled. However, between Mercury and Venus, the odds, they remain essentially unchanged, since they are astronomically restricted to a range that is already less than what's imposed by Kala Sarpa. Okay, so we are actually left with a scenario where there will be 10 different pairs of Graha Yuddha among the 5 true planets. Okay, so what happens is, theoretically, the chances of planetary war in a chart without Kala Sarpa is around 8%. Okay, but in a chart with Kala Sarpa, it becomes around 13%. Okay, so the chances of Graha Yuddha also increases. Okay, and in other words, Kala Sarpa almost doubles the actual occurrence of Graha Yuddha as compared to the average chart. All right, now what happens is technically there is always a winner in the planetary war. Okay, the planet which is at a higher degrees will always win the planetary war. But just like in a real war, both the opponents are harmed. So a Graha Yuddha will also harm both the parties who are a part of this conflict. Okay, so this is further proof that Kala Sarpa has a bias for damaging one planet or another, and as one planet is damaged, it also ends up damaging some aspect of life. Okay, so what I'm saying is, in Kala Sarpa charts, the occurrence of both Pravrajya Yoga and the resultant Graha Yuddha jumps up dramatically. Okay, it jumps up dramatically. And the other thing is Kala Sarpa, as I said, it favors the formation of, of Pravrajya Yoga. Okay, so famous people who have this combination, they are more fortunate in the disposition of these particular planets forming the Pravrajya. Okay, and for fame, okay, if a person has Pravrajya Yoga, if a person, has Kala Sarpa as well as Pravrajya Yoga, for fame to come in, then the planets which are forming the Pravrajya Yoga, they have to be spread out more evenly, because when they are spread out more evenly, then planetary war or Graha Yuddha is avoided. Okay, and as a result, the damage that happens to the conflicting planets, they are reduced. Okay, and when the damages are reduced, the karakas or the karakatwas of those planets, they are also saved. Okay, so at best, based on our study, we can say that Kala Sarpa is is full of mixed blessings. Okay, so there is a very infamous and ambiguous Chinese proverb. Okay, may you live in interesting times. Yes, so this is Kali Yuga, and the times are very, very interesting. Okay, so at best, Kala Sarpa may be viewed as a mixed blessing. Okay, and it requires a lot of study, a lot of analysis to come to the final judgment regarding its outcome for the native. Okay, so what happens is the crowding of planets into roughly half the zodiac, it restricts both the brightness of the moon and that of the true planets by curtailing its lunation cycle as well as the retrogression. Okay, so what is happening is Kala Sarpa, it vitiates one of each of their respective avasthas. Okay, so these are all avasthas: combustion, retrogression, Graha Yuddha. These are all avasthas. And other than that, Kala Sarpa also forces the planets into clusters. Okay, creating some negative Sankhya yogas, as we saw in the previous class. Okay, it also causes risks of combustion and Graha Yuddha. Okay, so combustion and Graha Yuddha, it also compromises on the avasthas of the planet. Combustion helps, combustion primarily happens when a planet comes very close to the sun. But when the planet is damaged, the sun is also damaged to a certain extent. Okay, so what happens is, all these factors, they bring about a lot of turmoil in the life of the native who has Kala Sarpa. Okay, and the challenge is to study these diverse and contradictory indications in order to determine a likely prediction for the life of the native whose chart has a Kala Sarpa. Okay, so as I said, Kala Sarpa can be best evaluated as a mixed blessing. Okay, and there are certain general principles in evaluating Kala Sarpa. We will use those general principles. I'll discuss those now, but do you have any doubts till here? Just want to know. Okay, just stop for a couple of minutes. We'll continue. Okay. So we look at a few general principles in evaluating Kala Sarpa. Okay. So whenever as an astrologer or in general, whenever you see a chart with Kala Sarpa yoga, you must approach it differently. Okay. You must assume that there are potentially two sides of a horoscope. And don't look at this chart with a lot of bias, thinking that all Kala Sarpa is bad. Okay, no. You have to ask yourself whether is there a bright side or a dark side to this chart. Okay, so you have to understand that the core principle of Kala Sarpa is that this yoga will amplify the horoscope and it magnifies the effects of the chart themes for better or worse. Okay, so what happens is even minor positive yogas can give a major rise and vice versa. And even minor negative yogas can bring a fall. Okay, so it's a result of the horoscope being amplified. Okay, and depending on the planetary configurations that may be present in a chart, the results, can be a mix of both good or bad. Okay, and under certain optimum conditions within a Kala Sarpa chart, the nodes can actually make the entire life very, very blessed. Okay, and sometimes there can be a two-way effect. Okay, the sometimes the Kala Sarpa pattern can power up and energize a particular planet. Okay, or sometimes a particular planetary period can activate the Kala Sarpa conditions. Okay, and as an astrologer, you should always look for confluence in determining whether the effects will be good or bad or both. All right, so what I mean is, don't always judge the chart by looking at the D1. You should also look at the D9, okay, which is Navamsha. And then the Dasha sequence is very critical. Okay, specifically the periods of Rahu and Ketu, or the sub periods of Rahu and Ketu, are very important periods, along with those planets with which they are strongly connected. Okay, so by connection I mean by conjunction or aspect. Okay, so there's one interesting piece of information that must be known. This is not usually revealed by astrologers, but you can actually rotate the Kala Sarpa chart to see the effects of other people in the life of a native. Okay, for example, say the Rahu Ketu axis is running through the second 8th house of a native. Okay, so say Rahu is in the second house and Ketu is in the 8th house. So a nodal axis that runs through the second 8th house of a native will be aligned through the 4th and 10th houses from the perspective of the first child. Why? Because the first child is seen from the 5th house. Okay, so that is one way to look at the chart. All right, now, as we have been seeing in the we have been seeing in the previous class and also today, we have been trying to see whether a Kala Sarpa can be determined as a yoga or a dosha. Okay, so we know that Kala Sarpa has variants, and cases of pure Kala Sarpa where Rahu and Ketu are alone without any planet, okay, is very, very rare. Okay, is very, very less. But then even within the same class, there are certain qualitative differences. Okay, so to know whether this Kala Sarpa pattern manifests as yoga or dosha or both, we actually have to ask a few questions. Okay, number one, you have to see the directional type of Kala Sarpa. Okay, whether the type is Anuloma. Anuloma means the planets are moving towards Rahu, or whether the type is Viloma. That means whether the planets are moving towards Ketu. Okay, so usually the Anuloma pattern is said to be troublesome, and the Viloma pattern is said to give wealth, although with a lot of problems. Okay, so the bottom line is Kala Sarpa is challenging in either directions. Okay, so the second thing that you need to say is that whether whether the native was born under an eclipse. Okay, so we know that the nodes are dire enemies of Surya and Chandra. Ketu is the worst enemy for the moon, and Rahu is the worst enemy for the sun. So if the native was born during an eclipse, then know that apart from the Kala Sarpa yoga, sun and moon will be potentially weak. Okay, will be potentially weak because this yoga is either happening between new moon or with full moon. Okay, so if Kala Sarpa is occurring in the chart and the native has been born during an eclipse, so it will act as a double dosha. Okay, it will act as a double dosha. Then thirdly, the sun and in cases of partial Kala Sarpa. Okay, in cases of partial Kala Sarpa, you have to see if the nodes have gone and associated with the sun or moon. Okay, even in the absence of an eclipse or even in the absence of Kala Sarpa, the nodes aligning with the sun or moon, it is considered to be negative. Okay, it creates a dosha. Okay, And then you have to see if Jupiter aspect either of the nodes. Does Jupiter aspect either Rahu or Ketu? So what happens is, since Jupiter is the most benefic planet, so it will soften the nodal effects and it promotes the yoga. Okay, it makes the Kala Sarpa beneficial. All right. And if Jupiter is on the nodal axis itself, then it is better. Okay, because then it will simultaneously conjunct and aspect the nodes together. Okay, so the aspect of Jupiter on either of the nodes is a lifesaver, in my opinion. Okay, now you also have to see, does Mars or Saturn aspect the nodes? Why? Because Mars is the most malefic planet, and since it is the most malefic, any aspect upon the nodes will aggravate the nature of the nodes, and that will create a dosha. Okay, similarly, if Saturn is aspecting the nodes, it can create a similar dosha. Okay, now what if Mars is with Mars is with Saturn, sorry, Mars is with Rahu and Saturn is with Ketu? Then it can exert a dual influence. Okay, a dual dosha. All right, so whatever it is, if either of Mars or Saturn lies on the nodal axis itself, then the influence on the nodes is highly negative. Okay, because the Mars or Saturn will have a seventh aspect. So suppose Mars is lying with Rahu, then it will still look at Ketu, or if Saturn is lying with Ketu, it will still look at Rahu. Okay, so it actually makes the influence on the nodes very, very negative. Then the next factor that you have to look at is there a stellium? What is stellium? Stellium means pravrajya. Okay, accumulation of more than four, or four or more than four planets in one house or sign. All right, and suppose let's say there is a stellium of planets. Suppose the native has three planets in Aries, and right now as Rahu is transiting Aries, okay, so it can cause a lot of trouble for that house signified by Aries. Okay, so every 18 years we know that the nodes, they change their sign every 18 years. So every 18 years the node in whose direction the planets are moving will transit every planet on one side of the nodal axis. Okay, and you know since whenever the nodes transit, they will always irritate the occupants of a particular house. So it's much better to have your misery served to you in small portions rather than given it all together. Okay, so a stellium is always seen as a negative if the chart has a Kala Sarpa. Okay, it is like a bomb which is waiting to be detonated. All right, then you also have to see whether there are any exaggerated grahas in the chart. All right, and the presence of this Kala Sarpa can actually empower any exaggerated planet for good or bad. Okay, so what are exaggerated planets? If planets are exalted, debiliated, retrograde, combust, graha yuddha, or if the moon is new or full. So in these cases, any influence of Kala Sarpa can cause empowerment for the planet which is either retrograde or exalted, and so on. Okay, and although both good and bad can occur, just hold on. Yeah, there's someone at the door. Okay, so as I said, Kala Sarpa can empower planets which are exalted or debilitated and so on, for either for good or ill. Okay, and if planets are strong, okay, if the planets are majorly strong, then the Kala Sarpa pattern will give more yoga-like effects. Okay, and if planets are majorly weak, then it will obviously seem like a dosha. Okay, now we'll look at some specific techniques for analyzing. Kala Sarpa. Okay. So we'll end with the, we'll end with the techniques today. Yeah. So while analyzing the horoscope that contains a Kala Sarpa, you have to consider a few factors. Okay. You have to notice the house placements of Rahu and Ketu. Okay. So whichever house Rahu and Ketu are placed, problems will come from those houses. Okay, why? Because the themes of those houses will be activated by this pattern of Kala Sarpa, the cosmic serpent. Okay. Then to identify the primary nodal effect, you have to consider the node in whose direction all the planets are moving. As I said, there are two patterns, the anuloma and the viloma. Anuloma is troublesome, viloma is less troublesome. Okay. And secondly, if you are running the dasha of one of the nodes, then the house placement of that node will become the focus of attention during the entire time period. That means for Rahu dasha it will be a focus of 18 years, and for Ketu dasha it will be 7 years. Okay. Now you have to look at the strength of each node by the strength of its dispositor by both sign and nakshatra. Okay. So if the dispositors or the nodes are well placed, then the dasha will not be that troublesome. Okay. And if the nodes are in their own nakshatra, okay, for example, if Ketu is in its own nakshatra of Ashwini or Rahu is in its own nakshatra of Shatabhisha, then it is very positive. Okay. Then it is very positive. And always remember that it is the condition of the nodes dispositors that matters more than which planet it is. Okay. For example, say Rahu is placed in Aquarius. Okay. Then it is much better. Okay. It is much better if Saturn is strongly placed. Okay. Even if it is Saturn, it is good. All right. Similarly, say Rahu is placed in say Sagittarius, and then Jupiter is placed in say Capricorn, then it is difficult. Okay. So if the dispositors are strong, or if they are forming positive yogas with other planets, then their stability would serve well for the native. Okay. And for good results, the dispositor of the nodes should not be weak or afflicted. Okay. So for good results to happen from Kala Sarpa, the dispositor should not be with sun or moon. Okay, because indirectly it implies that Rahu and Ketu are associating with the luminaries. Okay, indirectly it indicates. Okay, indirectly it says that Rahu and Ketu have associated with the luminaries. Okay, so it is a problem. Okay, but what if Rahu and Ketu are in Cancer, or what if Rahu or Ketu are in Cancer or Leo, which is ruled exclusively by Sun and Moon? In that case, the Sun and Moon should not associate with Jupiter. Okay, remember this rule. All right. The dispositor of the nodes should not associate with Sun or Moon to give you good results. Okay. Then, if the dispositor of the nodes is exalted, okay, if the dispositor of the nodes is exalted, then the dashas of that node, okay, as well as the exalted dispositor, can be very good. Okay. And if the dispositor of the nodes is debilitated, then the dashas of that node and the dasha of that debilitated dispositor can be very bad. Okay. Then while looking at the Kala Sarpa chart, you have to note the presence of yogas. Okay. Not those yogas which involve the nodal dispositors. Okay, but other yogas, not involving the nodal dispositors, because those periods or the dashas of those planets forming the yogas can be very, very good. Okay. Now, in case of perfect Kala Sarpa, okay, in case of perfect Kala Sarpa, that means the nodes are alone and no planet is associating with the nodes in the same house. Okay. So in that case, a Raja Yoga, if it is being formed in the Kendras, it is very uplifting, and the positive effects of that Raja Yoga is amplified by the Kala Sarpa. Okay. And what it also means is, if such a condition is happening, the periods of both the nodes and the yoga and the planets forming the Raja Yoga will be excellent. Okay. Then when you look at a chart, you also have to look at the Dasha Bhukti operating at birth and see if their lords have any connection to the Rahu Ketu axis. Okay, so suppose somebody has has Kala Sarpa, and then Rahu is Mercury is being aspected by Rahu, and the person was born in Mercury Dasha. Okay, so in that case, the nodes have the power to give additional strength to these grahas. Okay, and the houses ruled by these grahas will be very, very active at the time of birth. All right. So you also have to check whether the Lagna lords, okay, that means whether the lord of the Chandra Rashi or the lord of the Chandra Nakshatra, if they are linked in any way to Rahu or Ketu, then those periods can also become very significant in on the basis of their strength or weakness or involvement in yogas. Okay, so again, I'm repeating myself. Take note of any exaggerated grahas, exalted, debilitated, retrograde, combust, or planetary war, or Amavasya or full moon, and see whether they are linked to Rahu or Ketu or not. Okay, and under the principle of amplification, Kala Sarpa can magnify the results of those planets in their respective periods. Okay, for example, if a if a planet is retrograde, Kala Sarpa can make that planet super strong. Okay, and the houses ruled by those planets will exert a lot of influence on the native during their respective dashas. Okay, and then if a chart has Kala Sarpa, where any graha occupies the same rashi as a node and yet lies outside the nodal axis. For example, say in a Kala Sarpa chart, the degree of say Rahu is aspected by Rahu is joined say Jupiter, and the degree of Jupiter is more than Rahu. In that case, Jupiter is said to lie outside the Kala Sarpa axis. Okay, so in that case, the outcome of this Kala Sarpa, whether good or bad, will depend upon the condition of that planet. Okay. For example, if there is a Kala Sarpa yoga with only one planet out of the axis, then the Dasha of that planet will be very, very challenging. Okay, not good or bad, but challenging. Okay. Now you have to look at the yogi of the chart. You can easily find out by any software. Okay, look at the yogi of the chart. Okay, so I've taught about yogi and avayogi extensively in my in my nakshatra class. All right, I've taught about yogi and avayogi in the nakshatra class, in the panchanga class, but just any software will give you the calculation for yogi or avayogi. So if either of the nodes are in the yogi nakshatra, then it can give a lot of wealth during the period of the node or the period of the yogi planet. Okay, so look up how the yogi planet is found out. All right, I've also done a few webinars on the yogi nakshatra, on the yogi planet and wealth, so you can look up those videos as well. It's there in my YouTube channel. Okay, so in the next class we will look at the the 12 types of nagas with respect to Kala Sarpa patterns. Okay, for example, if Rahu is in the first house and Ketu is in the seventh house, then it is known as Ananta. If Rahu is in the second house, Ketu is in the eighth house, it is known as Kulika, and so on. Okay, so that is for the next class. Okay, so do you have any doubts here at this point? I hope no. Okay, great. So thank you for joining in. I'll see you tomorrow in the Jyotish Foundation class, and happy weekend to everyone who will also be watching the recordings. Okay, namaste everyone. Om Gurave Namaha.